Skinny spazoid. Vlad III is known infamously as the inspiration behind the Dracula character in Bram Stoker's Dracula. The reality of the man is that he was a truly troubled individual who had seemingly no respect for humanity as long as he had certain motives. Prince of Wallachia, now modern-day Romania, Vlad was also known as the Impaler for his cruel acts against humanity. Vlad was an insane ruler struggling for power, and eventually his madness led to his downfall, as the country he tried so hard to protect was conquered by the Ottomans, the very people he fought wars against. Number 10. He drank blood. Yes, really. This is actually not an exaggeration. Vlad was known to drain the blood of people whom he killed and dip bread into it. Yes, the famous blood-sucking vampires were inspired by the real actions of this man. Number 9. Abused animals. There are multiple accounts of Vlad impaling animals. Vlad impaled a donkey belonging to 2 monks, who he also impaled. Vlad was also said to impale mice and small birds during the period of his life when he was imprisoned. Number 8. Revered. Believe it or not, Vlad was revered in his own country, even today. This is because the country was so messed up during the time that the fact that someone could control crime and invasions from happening was welcome despite the reality of what was happening. So not only was Vlad like this, but he had many people in his country who felt like him and supported him. Number 7. Head was taken as a trophy. When defeated by the Turks, they cut off his head and took it as a trophy. This just shows the sentiment that people had for him at the time, and that he really was considered to be a monster. It's also interesting to note that this was a similar kind of killing to the way Mussolini died. Number 6. Harsh rule. A part of the reason there was such low crime during Vlad's rule was that he was so harsh on criminals. It was said that Vlad hated thieves and acts of evil so much that he violently punished criminals by impaling them, often using them as an example to people so that they wouldn't do the same. This is the reason why Vlad was such a terrible human being, because he punished people's bad acts with much more harsh and terrible punishments. Yes, stealing is bad for society, but impaling someone is such an inhumane act that it is evident that impaling the thief is actually worse than having them steal. Number 5. Persecution of Transylvanian Saxons. Vlad often had an issue of gaining support from fellow Eastern European neighboring countries. This led him to start persecuting neighboring Transylvanian Saxons, whom he raided and, of course, impaled. Number 4. Sexual implications. It is very possible that while in prison, Vlad was raped at a young age. Also, his father, mother, and brother were murdered during his young age as well. This is why many have speculated that the impalements may have been sexual in nature, as often he would impale through the rectum and impale them in such a way that they would stay alive for a while. Vlad was certainly very troubled, and the reality of his life was extremely tragic. Whatever happened to him, it turned him into a beast of a man, a monstrosity who let out his rage by hurting other people. Number 3. Use torture to combat anxiety. It is also very possible that Vlad used torture as a means to combat anxiety. This is because of his impalement of small animals while in prison. Vlad also likely used horses as a sort of restraint, as he would tie a rope around people and connect it to a horse so that he could restrain people with enough force to impale them in any way he chose. Overall, the impalements were very dramatic, most likely on purpose, as it was clear that Vlad was indulging in them and wanted to see the people being impaled broken. Number 2. Terrorism. As stated before, the purpose of all these impalements were to strike fear into people. The amount of terror that this man put into people is unmeasurable. The damage that it had on people was paramount. Vlad was obsessed with terrorizing others, even arbitrarily impaling people to intimidate the opposing Turkish army. Vlad once impaled 20,000 bodies in a forest in order to scare invading Turkish troops. This place was called the Forest of the Impaled. In the Forest of the Impaled, he used dead bodies as well, showing that it wasn't always to ease his anxiety, but also to freak people out. Number 1. Impalements. Throughout the list, I've discussed the impalements that Vlad did, but this entry is dedicated to the overall atrocity that was these impalements. Vlad impaled or tortured around 100,000 people in his lifetime, a horrifyingly high number. Vlad believed that he was protecting his country from tyrants, but in doing so, he himself became arguably the most inhumane dictator in history. His reckless disregard for human life is disgusting and shows the true terror of war and a civilization controlled by the chaotic mind of someone insane.